Number 10. Early release. 42-year-old Oklahoma man Lawrence Anderson was originally sentenced to spend 20 years in jail in 2017 for violating his probation in a narcotics case. However, in 2020, Governor Kevin Stitt had reduced Anderson's term to 9 years in prison, but he was released after serving just only 3 years. Shortly after his release, he killed 3 people, including a gruesome murder of a neighbor whose heart he tore out. What the? Just after a year of his release, Anderson was suspected of murder. Apparently, he brutally killed his neighbor Andrea Lynn Blankenship, a 41-year-old woman, and ripped out her heart. He then carried her heart to his relative's residence, prepared it with potatoes, and tried to feed it to them. He then murdered his uncle, 67-year-old Leon Pye, injured his aunt, and killed the couple's 4-year-old granddaughter. During his initial court appearance, he cried in court, begging for bail. Anderson's lawyer said that he would seek a psychiatric examination to see if Anderson can stand trial. The district attorney for Grady County slammed the criminal justice reform, which had led to the release of hundreds of Oklahoma prisoners. It is reported that the killings would not have happened if he had been sentenced to serve his 20 years in prison. Lawrence is now behind bars in Grady County Jail without a possibility of bail. Number 9. Due to COVID-19. On November 4, 2020, 25-year-old Jerry D. Crawford, who had been serving a burglary sentence, was freed on public health emergency credits to reduce the spread of COVID-19 in Cumberland County Jail. Thousands of convicts were freed early under the evacuation plan in 2020 due to fatalities and rising infection rates linked to the coronavirus. All of those who were officially released were only a few months away from their scheduled release dates. Crawford was set to be released the next month, on December 24th, but he got out early. On November 6th, just 2 days after his release, Crawford and Yusuf Waits were subsequently charged with the assassination of Davian Scarborough. Waits was released from the Garden State Youth Correctional Facility in Burlington County on October 10th after serving his term of a gun offense. On November 9, 2020, 18-year-old Davian Scarborough's body was discovered beside a gravel road in a meadow at the junction of Burlington Road with Pamphylia Avenue, about half a mile near Southwood State Prison, from where Crawford had been released 2 days before. Scarborough was shot several times. According to court records, Scarborough was seen with 2 other males at neighboring Burlington Manor apartments leading up to the attack. Security video footage of the complex depicted the 2 other individuals, who were subsequently recognized as Crawford and Waits. The investigation is still underway, and both Waits and Crawford are being held in the Cumberland County Jail while they await their detention hearings. In this case, justice wasn't served in full term, and maybe a death could have been prevented had it been. What do you think? Number 8. Wrongful execution. Richard Masterson was executed in Texas on January 20th, 2016, despite doubts about whether he had actually committed the crime. Masterson had requested a reprieve based on proof of state fraud and wrongdoing, as well as his innocence. On January 26, 2001, Masterson met Honeycutt at a bar. Next day, Honeycutt was found dead in his apartment. Masterson was accused of killing him. He admitted to placing a sleeper hold on the victim, which led to an episode of asphyxiation. A medical examiner declared Darren Honeycutt's demise as a homicide and stated that Honeycutt died by strangling. Masterson's papers questioned the prosecution's forensic findings, the jury's understanding of the procedures, and the legality of Texas's lethal injection secrecy law. In federal court papers, Masterson's attorneys claimed that the prosecutors withheld evidence showing Schroed was incompetent to conduct Mr. Honeycutt's autopsy. They alleged that he bungled the autopsy, faked his credentials, and testified falsely in the case and all other prior capital murder convictions. It was later revealed that Schroed, who had conducted the autopsy, was indeed untrained and had wrongly declared the demise as a homicide. The 2 pathologists who studied Honeycutt's autopsy records declared that the death was triggered by a heart attack. Who do you think should be held accountable in this case? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking the video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 7. No records. In 1963, Pauline Evans was 24 years old and lived in Wisconsin. She had told her doctor that she didn't need any more therapy for social anxiety. He allegedly provided her with medication during her final visit, presumably to aid her treatment program. Instead, it knocked her unconscious, and he took advantage of the situation and raped her. As a consequence, she claims she got pregnant. She reported him to the police, but she never claims he was not prosecuted because he promised to give up his license. 5 weeks later, though, he got it back. When she found out he got it back, she went to the medical board demanding why he was reinstated, and the board said they had no records of it. Evans gave birth to a baby boy and gave him up for adoption. With great effort and determination, she overcame the trauma. The psychiatrist died in 1994. Evans wrote 3 books stemming from the experience of its aftermath, referring to the psychiatrist as only Dr. K. This is a clear case wherein the officials handled the matter horribly, and the lady did not get her justice. Number 6. Innocent. In 1975, Ronnie Bridgman, Wiley Bridgman, and Ricky Jackson, 3 black men, just 17, 20, and 18 years old at the time, were wrongfully convicted of the robbery and murder of Harold Franks outside a Cleveland convenience store. The statement of 13-year-old Edward Vernon was vital in the conviction. The kid stated he had observed Bridgman and other 2 young guys aggressively beat the Franks on a downtown street corner. There was no technical or physical evidence linking to 3 men to the murder, and they had never been convicted of any crimes before. According to another eyewitness, Bridgman was not even on the corner of the street when Franks was murdered. Despite this, Ronnie and the 2 others were sentenced to death only a few months after their capture. In 1977, the sentence was commuted to life imprisonment, while Ronnie and Wiley did 27 and 28 years respectively. Being released on parole, Jackson did all of 39 years. This was recorded as the longest period a convict had served before being exonerated in all of United States history. It had been disclosed publicly 39 years later that perhaps the child who testified against them sought to retract his statement right away. But the Cleveland homicide investigators threatened the kid. They pronounced that if he changes his statement, he would be arrested and his family would be accused of perjury. However, it took almost another 12 years to proclaim the killing when the boy's false confession and the police wrongdoings were disclosed in a separate court case. The men were finally released, and in November 2014, they received millions of dollars in a settlement to compensate for their wrongful convictions and imprisonment. It's a pity that someone had to suffer the fate of a crime they did not commit. Number 5. Wrongfully accused. In January 1982, a Greenwood, South Carolina resident was discovered dead in her closet by her neighbor Jimmy Holloway. According to Holloway, Dorothy Edwards, a 75-year-old woman who lived just next to his house, had informed him that she was on her way out of the city. However, 2 days later, he noticed her parked car in the driveway, so he went to check and discovered the rear door open and observed some disturbing evidence. He entered the apartment and found a massive amount of blood on the ground, a knife laying nearby, as well as an empty bag in the room. He subsequently proceeded to get another neighbor, from whom they contacted the hospitals to ask whether Dorothy was there. The other neighbor then followed him back to the house, where he had claimed he retrieved gloves from his back pocket, wore them, and unlocked the closet door. That was when he discovered Dorothy's mutilated body. Holloway dialed 911 and stood in the yard waiting for the cops, telling them the killer's identity might be located in Edward's payment records. Edward Lee Elmore, a mentally handicapped who worked as a handyman at Dorothy's residence, was arrested in less than 48 hours when police discovered a matching fingerprint on the frame of Dorothy's back door. A handful of his pubic hair was also found at the site. Bloodstains on his clothing that day were the same as Dorothy's blood type. Elmore had to spend the rest of his days in prison due to the legal battles that ensued. In 1982, he had been found guilty and condemned to death, but the verdict was reversed. After a second conviction, he was sentenced to death, and he remained on death row until 2010, after which his death penalty was vacated. The authorities had not taken photos of the pubic hair after the alleged discovery, and for evidence, instead of small spots, large quantities of blood should have been there on the murderer's clothing. It was later found that the evidence had all been planted by the cops to link Elmore to the violent act. Eventually, Elmore was given an option to either face the 4th trial or be freed from jail instantly. He had to sign a plea deal that maintained his innocence while admitting there was enough evidence for the jury to find him guilty. On March 3, 2012, he was finally liberated after 30 years in jail for a crime he did not commit. On December 3, 2018, he passed away, a free man. Number 4. Self-defense. In Oregon in 2018, 2 Utah men were fatally shot during an argument. The men's family came forward to speak out because the accused were found innocent of the killings in 2020. Trevor Gilmore was accused of shooting and killing Justin Severnak, 38, and Christopher Lyon, 42, on Black Friday in 2018. He was found not guilty of aggravated murder and 3 counts of illegal use of weaponry, but convicted of 1 count of murder in the killing of just Christopher Lyon. After 2 weeks of trial, Josephine County Judge Matthew Golly ruled that Gilmore gunned down the 2 men in an attempt to save himself on November 23, 2018, and that Gilmore did not intend to kill Lyon. According to the documents, although Severnak was not armed, Lyon's body had a concealed gun. Selena Borg, the niece of the deceased, had said that their lives had been torn apart ever since the family lost their kin. Lyon's longtime partner, Jatame Carter, believes that no one deserves to die. Moreover, she believes that Gilmore's actions took two men's lives, which will affect them every single day of their lives. According to officers, Severnak had an argument with his wife. She fled their house and ended up seeking refuge in Gilmore's ex-wife's house, where he, Gilmore, was also present. Sometime later, Severnak and Lyon arrived at the house and made their way in, where a few children and teenagers were present as well. According to police, Severnak was shouting aggressively and threatened them physically. Gilmore got angry, fetched his gun from his bedroom, and ordered the men to leave the house immediately. The men refused to leave without taking Severnak's wife, who had run away from the argument, along with them. Witnesses claim Gilmore fired numerous bullets at Severnak during the turmoil, 3 of which struck Severnak in the rear, killing him instantly, and just 1 struck Lyon, who officers say was not aggressive during the shooting. Gilmore was then sentenced to 10 years in prison on account of murder and unlawful use of weapons. Number 3. Killer daughter. Andrew and Abby Borden were murdered on August 4, 1892, in Fall River, Massachusetts. Lizzie Borden, age 33, was charged for the killings because she was home alone when the massacre happened, and no indications of a fight were visible. The prosecution produced the notorious head of an axe, which was considered a critical piece of evidence. Shortly after the trial, Borden said she set fire to the dress because it was splattered with paint. Despite this, the prosecution was unable to clearly establish that she, and nobody else, was responsible for the parents' deaths. There were reports that Borden had a problematic relationship with her stepmother, but witnesses at her trials testified that wasn't true. Another suspect was never discovered until the investigation was closed, and Borden was declared not guilty. While there isn't any doubt that Lizzie Borden was responsible for the killings, she was never charged. Despite being secluded from other residents, she stayed back in Fall River. At the age of 66, she died of pneumonia. Number 2. Innocent? New DNA forensic evidence had cast grave doubts on Odell's killings and rape convictions. 3 Supreme Court justices indicated they had questions about Odell's conviction and whether he should also have been permitted to represent himself when they reviewed his case in the year 1991. In 1985, Joseph Odell was convicted for the murder of his secretary, 44-year-old Helen Shartner. She was found on the side of a muddy road, behind a bar, raped, sodomized, and strangled. There was minimal evidence tying Odell to the incident without the blood proof. The Fourth Circuit of the United States Court of Appeals restored his death penalty and affirmed his guilt in 1996. The Supreme Court of the United States refused to hear Odell's pleas of innocence, ruling that the judgment concerning juries being informed of the alternate penalty of life without having a chance for parole was just not applicable in his case. Odell had requested the state to undertake DNA testing on other bits of evidence to prove his innocence. However, the request was denied. Despite a worldwide campaign to spare him, on July 23, 1997, he was put to death in Virginia. He was arguably innocent. Apparently, the court had appointed an attorney whose expertise was not criminal law. And number 1, insurance injustice. In October 2017, Ricky Melendez was heading to work when an SUV sped through a red traffic light and slammed into his Camry from nowhere. The SUV was traveling at a dangerously high speed, 112 miles per hour, and running a red light. Furthermore, it had also been stolen. According to the police report, 4 adolescent guys spent the day breaking into automobiles to go joyriding. 3 of the suspects in the SUV died in the collision, while another was flung through the glass. Melendez had broken no laws, according to the investigation. Despite this, Melendez's vehicle insurance company agreed to give the boys' families a sum of $20,000 in compensation. It contrasted to the $10,000 Melendez received for his injury protection policy, which was insufficient to meet his 6-figure medical costs. Melendez was unable to stay employed since the accident and spent most of his days in a wheelchair. The insurance decision to compensate the at-fault party's family was solely based on financial considerations. $20,000 is a pittance in comparison to the cost of defending several cases, even if they are frivolous. Overall, the insurance firm acted unfairly.
10. Down and Under. Jovi Liu Yuling was 25 years old when she fell into a swimming pool and drowned. She was a popular Chinese cosplay model doing a photo shoot in Japan. It was actually her fans on social media who asked her to go to Saipan to do the shoot, organized by her modeling agency. She checked in at the Seafun Villa on September 25th, but she never checked out. Here's how she drowned. As she was in the middle of the photo shoot, she tripped and fell into the pool, taking 2 other people with her. The pool was only about 9.8 feet deep. Most people would have been able to just swim to the edge and pull themselves out. The problem was that Liu didn't know how to swim. The other people with her, the photographers and her friends, also didn't know how to swim. They had to wait for hotel staff to jump into the pool and pull her out. And by then, 3 minutes had already gone by. When they got her to a hospital, she was already in a coma. Her 2 friends had been flushed into the shallow part of the pool, so they managed to escape with their lives. The doctors did the best they could to keep Liu alive, but she died the next day from lack of oxygen to the brain. And all because nobody with her had the stomach to jump into a luxury hotel pool. 9. Chloe AYLING. Chloe AYLING was abducted in July of 2017. The 20-year-old girl was working in London for a supermodel agency in March of 2017. Chloe was supposed to go to Paris for a photo shoot organized by a Polish computer programmer named Lucas Erba, but the plan fell apart and she never went. It was in July that Chloe was contacted yet again by the same guy, requesting another photo shoot, this time in Milan, Italy. Chloe went for the photo shoot, but she never returned to England. Her mother reported her missing. Then the modeling agency where she worked received a ransom email demanding over $300,000. If the money failed to be delivered, the abductors said, the model was going to be sold as a sex slave on the dark web. The consulate for the UK was contacted in Italy. Italian police were organized, and the cops stormed the address of the photo studio Chloe was supposed to be at. But there was no photo studio. Inside the building, which was really just an abandoned warehouse-type place, the police found some of Chloe's clothes, but no sign of the girl herself. Days later, Chloe and the Polish computer programmer turned up at the consulate in Milan. This was a weird case. As it turned out, Lucas had injected the model with ketamine, handcuffed her, and then put her in a suitcase and stuffed her in the trunk of his car. He told police he did it because he had fallen in love with the model and wanted to help her career by pulling a publicity stunt. But in reality, it was a very real crime, and Lucas was sentenced to 16 years in prison. 8. Armed and dangerous. When a teenager posed with a gun for a photo she was hoping to post on Facebook, she accidentally shot and killed her brother. The situation involved drinking, a whole heap of stupidity, and a bit of manslaughter. The 19-year-old Phoenix woman is now facing a potential manslaughter charge, all because she couldn't help but posing for Facebook pictures while playing with a loaded weapon. According to the local police, the brother and sister were playing with a gun following a party. Actually, it was an after-party party. They were both wasted. The teenage girl made what she probably thought was a super cool pose with a gun, and then it went off. The bullet went straight through her brother, Manuel Ortiz's head. When the police showed up, the girl was sitting on the curb crying her eyes out. She immediately admitted that she accidentally shot her brother, and the police took her away. When the cops checked Facebook, they found both her and her brother had previously posted pictures with them posing with weapons. In one of the pictures, the killer's sister was pointing a gun right at her brother's head. It was the exact same pose she tried to make again, though the second attempt had deadly consequences. When the gun went off in her hand, her brother's blood and brain matter splashing into her face was probably the most sobering moment of her entire life. 7. Pre-wedding blues. A couple attempting a dramatic photo shoot before their wedding ended up drowning together. The deceased have been identified as Chandru and Shashikala, a pair from India. They had taken a makeshift one-man boat called a coracle out into the river, about 90 feet from the riverbank, to complete a photo shoot inspired by the movie Titanic. But in the middle of the photo shoot, the boat collapsed and they both died. The bodies weren't recovered until about 3 hours later by professional swimmers. The couple got engaged in November of the previous year and were set to be married within just days. The reason they'd taken a makeshift boat only suitable for one person instead of an actual motorboat was because the resort they were staying at didn't have one. The photographer didn't even have room to be in the boat. He had to stand on the riverbank taking the photos. The couple were supposed to be imitating various scenes from Titanic. It all went wrong when Sheshakala, who was wearing high heels, lost her balance and tipped the boat over. She and her soon-to-be husband fell into the water and were swept away by the current. Those on the riverbank could do nothing but watch as they vanished out of sight. Have you ever been involved in a photo shoot so obviously dangerous as this? Let us know about any close calls in the comments, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 6. Freak electrical accident. Dr. Denis Ricardo Faria Gergel was 31 years old and due to be married. Life couldn't have looked any better for this young doctor and his bride. At least that was until he got electrocuted while in the middle of his own wedding photo shoot. It turned out Dr. Denis wasn't quite as bright as he thought. He was holding onto a fishing rod when it snagged a power line overhead during the photo shoot, sending a fatal dose of electricity straight into his body. To make matters even more tragic, it happened the day before the wedding. If you're wondering what he was doing with a fishing rod, it was all part of the photo shoot. He and his wife were posing with fishing rods in Cariri do Cocatins, Brazil, basically in the middle of the jungle. It's not clear what exactly they were trying to prove. Maybe they wanted their wedding pictures to show them as cute, outdoorsy people. Whatever the case, Denis got his hook stuck in the power line. He didn't actually get electrocuted until he tried to unhook the piece of metal from the line. He put both hands on the power line, which apparently had lost part of its plastic coating. He literally touched the one thing everyone knows you're not supposed to touch. The current was enough to fry him instantly. 5. The worst selfie. A 33-year-old woman from Belgium died trying to take a selfie. This is something we're hearing more and more of lately as people go absolutely wild, doing whatever it takes to capture the perfect moment to post to social media. In this case, the woman was posing for a solo photo shoot on the edge of a cliff, arguably the worst place to take a selfie. Zoe Snooks was vacationing with their husband in Luxembourg. They were near the small village of Nadron when Zoe decided it was time for a risky selfie. She stood on the precipice of the cliff, flung her arms in the air, and attempted the picture. Instead of getting the photograph she wanted, she slipped backwards, tumbled 100 feet down to the ground below, and was dead instantly. Her body had to be recovered by a team of rescuers, including scuba divers, police, and firefighters. And all the while, her husband was just standing there, barely understanding what in the world had gone wrong. You see, Zoe and her husband, Jory, were traveling around Europe in their camper van. They'd been doing it ever since the pandemic and were pretty serious about getting in as many photo shoots as possible. This time, though, the photo proved to be more trouble than it was worth. Jory lost his wife, and she lost the rest of her life. 4. Photo shoot robbery. In India, the police arrested a man named Krishna Ghosh after a daring jewelry theft during a photo shoot. Krishna, in his mid-30s, escaped with a whole box of gold jewelry from a woman after he showed up to be the photographer for her pre-wedding photo shoot. He only actually got away with the crime for one day. It was the day after when the bride realized that her gold chains were missing, as well as a bunch of other jewelry. The police tracked down the thief to his apartment, where they discovered his bizarre photography scheme. Krishna was advertising himself on social media as a photographer and a professional photographer at that. But on the other hand, he was a straight-up jewel thief. Whenever he took photographs, he always had his eyes open for any loose jewels that might be ripe for the taking. He even got so bold that he began asking women to bring their own jewelry to show off in the photos. Then he would figure out a way to relieve them of their jewels and have them go on their way none the wiser. Alas, he was finally busted. The police found a small deposit of gold ornaments and cash in his apartment. 3. Nude at the mall. A photographer and his model have gotten into some serious hot water for a nude photo shoot gone wrong at a busy mall. Of course, the fact that both of them have been arrested isn't a huge surprise, but here's where things get absolutely ghoulish. The photographer is 64-year-old Michael Warnock. His nude model is a student at the Indiana University of Pennsylvania, 22-year-old Chelsea Guerra. On the surface, this looks pretty bad. It's an old man taking naked pictures of a young woman at a public strip mall. The Pennsylvania pair were arrested and brought up on misdemeanor charges of disorderly conduct. They also have to pay a $300 fine each. According to the police investigation, Chelsea responded to a Craigslist ad placed by Michael back in 2017. It should have been a red flag right there that a photographer was looking for young models on Craigslist. She voluntarily signed up to be a nude model, with a paycheck coming of $300. The really strange part is that Michael decided to hold the shoot at the Miracle Mile Shopping Center in Monroeville. The couple went there at 11 o'clock in the morning in full view of dozens of shoppers and started snapping risque photos. Somebody called 911 immediately. When the police arrived, they found Chelsea standing in front of the mall with nothing on except stockings and high heels. The old man was there too, snapping photographs. In her defense, Chelsea said the photos were supposed to be art. She also said nude modeling is honest work. Even if these things are true, a busy strip mall is probably a pretty bad place for that kind of art. 2. A very inappropriate photo shoot. Denise Jafer and Jamie Lewis, a pair of Metropolitan Police officers, have gotten into some serious trouble for the most inappropriate photo shoot imaginable. These two men, police officers who were supposed to be trusted by the public, were caught taking dehumanizing photos of a pair of murder victims, allegedly for their own amusement. They've since been jailed for nearly 3 years. But that doesn't make their disgusting photo shoot any less heinous. In fact, what they did could be compared to a serial killer like Jeffrey Dahmer keeping souvenirs of his victims. Denise and Jamie were ordered to guard the scene of a murder in a London park where two sisters were found stabbed to death back in June of 2020. The sisters were Nicole Shulman and Baba Henry. But while they were standing guard, they took out their phones and snapped some photographs of their dead bodies. Then they uploaded the photos into 2 separate WhatsApp groups. One of the groups contained at least 41 police officers. If it wasn't disgusting enough to take pictures of dead bodies, never mind the dead bodies of 2 girls who had just been murdered, the action of the cops almost got the killer off. They had gone into the crime scene, risking contamination just to take the pictures. Daniel Hussein, the killer who had been obsessed with Satan, nearly got off free because of their little photo shoot. Luckily enough, he was still found guilty and given life in prison. 1. Killed by the photographer. Model Linda Sobek was killed by a photographer. Linda was a former NFL cheerleader who turned to acting and modeling back in the 1990s. But in November of 1995, she vanished and nobody knew what happened to her. Linda was missing for 8 days before authorities were finally led to her buried remains by the very photographer who took her life. Charles Rathbun had dumped the woman, 10 years younger than him, in a remote area of the Angeles National Forest. Charles told the police that he had accidentally struck and killed her with his car while they were doing a photo shoot for some automobile magazine. But an autopsy showed that Rathbun had actually brutally strangled her to death and then dumped her into a shallow grave. There hadn't even been a photo shoot. It was all a ploy set up by Rathbun to get his murderous hands around Linda's throat.
Number 9. James Joseph DRESNOK. Like many kids who grow up without a stable home, James Joseph DRESNOK joined the U.S. Army after he finished high school in hopes of getting on the right path and establishing a better life for himself. During the early 1960s, he was stationed on the South Korean side of the 38th parallel, which separates the country from its communist neighbor to the north. DRESNOK soon found that while the military provided structure, it came with what he felt was a lack of freedom. One day, he decided that he was fed up with his life as he knew it. He deserted his post and crossed over into North Korea, where he was arrested and taken to Pyongyang for questioning. It was a split-second, yet irreversible decision. Once DRESNOK was in North Korean custody, he no longer had control of his future. He and 3 other American defectors spent years learning the rogue state's culture, language, and ideology while under the watchful eye of their minders. They tried escaping once through the Russian embassy, but were promptly turned back over to the North Koreans. Eventually, they gained citizenship and the privileges that came along with living in Pyongyang, where the most loyal citizens are given a relatively nice existence compared to those who live in the countryside. DRESNOK became famous for playing the role of an American villain in propaganda films. He married and fathered 3 children, and the government took care of him until his dying day. In the 2006 documentary, Crossing the Line, he said that he didn't regret defecting to North Korea, but even if he did, he would have been punished for admitting it, leaving one to wonder if DRESNOK simply made the most of his circumstances after making a life-changing choice that he couldn't take back. Number 8. Leslie J. Lindor. Leslie J. Lindor was a staff sergeant for the U.S. Army's Criminal Investigation Division at Fort Hood, Texas. In 2018, his 34-year-old wife, Rachel, was found dead. An investigation found that months earlier, Lindor had set out on a quest to acquire a fatal neurotoxin called tetrodotoxin, which is found in pufferfish and several other marine species. He told his commander that he was traveling to Florida, but instead went to Haiti to meet someone face-to-face to discuss getting the toxin. Lindor allegedly tried to poison Rachel several times, leading up to her death, including on 2 occasions where he put powder in her shoes and on the seat of her car. He also put the poison in his wife's water and food during a trip to Haiti. The plan eventually succeeded, sparking a joint investigation by the CID and the local police department. Several months later, detectives arrested Lindor on a slew of charges, including Rachel's murder, as well as misusing government information systems to track criminal complaints and interfere with the investigation into himself. He ultimately took a plea deal, which involved pleading guilty to the murder charge, along with stalking, disobeying a warrant officer, conspiracy to commit murder, and 3 counts of attempted murder. Lindor was dishonorably discharged from the military and sentenced to 70 years in prison. Number 7. The MARSOC 3. On New Year's Eve 2018, 2 decorated Marine Forces Special Operations Command, MARSOC, raiders, and a Navy corpsman were confronted by an extremely drunk civilian contractor named Richard Rodriguez outside a drinking establishment in Kurdistan, Iraq. Rodriguez had been kicked out of the establishment for being aggressive towards one of the men, known as the MARSOC 3. He waited outside for them to leave and began punching Gunnery Sergeant Danny Dreyer in the face. Gunnery Sergeant Josh Negron stepped in and dropped Rodriguez with a single punch. Footage of the disturbing encounter shows Rodriguez's friends fleeing the scene, leaving the MARSOC 3 to care for the man through the night. Despite their differences, the men did the right thing and took Rodriguez back to the base. At some point during the night, he became unresponsive. Navy Chief Petty Officer Eric Gilman performed life-saving measures on Rodriguez, who was rushed to a hospital in Germany. He died 4 days later after choking on his own vomit. In what many describe as one of the biggest military injustices in history, the MARSOC 3 are facing a host of charges, including negligent homicide, involuntary manslaughter, obstruction of justice, and dereliction of duty. Defense attorneys are arguing that the soldiers acted in self-defense and are trying to get a judge to dismiss the charges entirely. If convicted, the men will be dishonorably discharged and could spend over 20 years behind bars. Number 6. Marriage proposal misstep. The Nigerian military has a policy against engaging in romantic behavior while in uniform. A female soldier was recently arrested for violating that rule when she accepted a marriage proposal while on duty. She found herself in hot water after footage of her accepting the ring surfaced on social media, but people were quick to criticize the military for punishing the woman. A spokesperson from the Women Empowerment and Legal Aid Group accused the Army of discriminating against the soldier, noting that men have done similar things without getting in trouble. Human rights activist and former Nigerian presidential candidate Omoyele Sowore called the move misogynistic. The proposal came from a trainee from the National Youth Service Corps, the government's mandatory year-long youth training scheme. The program involves learning under the Army and is presumably how the couple met. Many people were happy for the couple and offered their congratulations after seeing the heartwarming video. Unfortunately, the woman's superiors disagreed, pointing out that her job was to train the recruits, not to get romantically involved with them. Number 5. The disappearance and death of Vanessa Guillen. U.S. Army soldier Vanessa Guillen was just 20 years old when she disappeared from Fort Hood, Texas on April 22, 2020. Her dismembered remains were found over 2 months later along the Leon River. Shortly thereafter, another enlisted soldier named David Robinson fled Fort Hood. The 20-year-old fatally shot himself while police tried to apprehend him on suspicion of murdering Vanessa. Robin's girlfriend, 22-year-old Cecily Aguilar, was accused of helping him destroy and burn Vanessa's body. She is facing numerous federal charges related to her alleged role in the crime. It later came to light that before Vanessa vanished, she had told her family that a sergeant was sexually harassing her. She also began to lose weight and appeared increasingly stressed and unhealthy. Other female soldiers had complained about the same individual, but the reports were overlooked. Vanessa had reassured her mother that she could handle the problem on her own, and she opted against making a formal complaint. After her remains were discovered, her family criticized the Army's handling of the investigation, which soon fell under widespread public scrutiny. An independent civilian panel found numerous issues with how the investigation was carried out, including a slew of rookie mistakes among highly inexperienced detectives. They had failed to thoroughly investigate Robinson in the immediate aftermath of Vanessa's disappearance, and chose not to get to the bottom of blatantly conflicting stories and details from other people they interviewed. The investigators even struggled to articulate the probable cause needed to obtain warrants. It wasn't until Major General Scott Eflin began looking into whether the CID had enough resources and expertise that these problems became clear. Sadly, the investigative shortcomings didn't start with Vanessa's case. A closer look revealed a troubling pattern of botched investigations, wasted resources, and fruitless pursuits within the department. Last year, the Army announced plans to restructure its CID and improve its policies to prevent history from repeating itself. Number 4. James Malt. It's been a little over a year since a mob of several thousand people stormed the U.S. Capitol in a violent rage, resulting in 5 deaths and numerous injuries. Not everyone who was involved in the insurrection was arrested right away. In fact, it took the authorities a while to track down many of the rioters. An Army veteran named James Malt was among these who managed to fly under the radar in the immediate aftermath of the rebellion. He left active duty as a sergeant in 2016. From then until 2020, he served as a combat engineer in the New York Army National Guard. After the attack on the Capitol, Malt decided to rejoin the Army. When the law finally caught up with him late last year, he was stationed at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. He was the 6th person who was a member of the military at the time of these arrests, but he was the first military member who wasn't enlisted when they participated in the riot. In a statement to CBS News, Army spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Gabriel Ramirez explained that the Army was unaware of Malt's involvement in the insurrection and any other information that would have disqualified him from re-enlisting. Ramirez also reassured the public that the Army conducts thorough background checks and other screenings to weed out applicants who don't belong in the service. Unfortunately, Malt managed to weasel his way past these steps. The Army said that it was cooperating with the FBI to improve the pre-screening process, but the FBI reportedly knew of Malt's involvement shortly after the attack. They apparently just didn't get around to arresting him until months later, when investigators charged him with a slew of violent crimes, including assaulting officers and spraying them with chemicals. Malt argued that he simply got caught up in the crowd as it pushed closer and closer to the Capitol building, giving him no choice but to move in with everyone. Prosecutors, on the other hand, are accusing Malt and his co-defendant of pushing their way to the front of the crowd. He's currently behind bars while he awaits his trial. Number 3. Dwayne Hall. One pedestrian recently died and another was seriously injured in Savannah, Georgia, when they were hit by a vehicle that was fleeing from the police. Officers had tried to pull over the red Dodge Charger after it was speeding, but the driver refused to comply, and a chase ensued. The police ultimately decided to end their pursuit per the department's policies and for safety reasons. It wasn't until after the chase ended that the vehicle struck 2 victims, killing 40-year-old Brandon Hamby. The motorist fled the scene. Horrified onlookers said that the crash sounded like an explosion and that it was immediately followed by screaming. Acting on a tip several days later, police found a vehicle with damage consistent with the collision. It belonged to a soldier named Dwayne Rico Hall, who was stationed at nearby Fort Stewart. The Georgia State Patrol brought him in for questioning, and he reportedly confessed to the deadly hit-and-run. Hall is currently being held in the county jail as he faces a first-degree vehicular homicide charge. An investigation into the incident is ongoing. In the meantime, locals are calling for improved safety measures to protect the increasing number of pedestrians in the area. Number 2. Stuart Scheller Jr. Former Marine Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller stoked heated controversy last year when he posted a series of videos of himself in uniform, harshly criticizing the American military's abrupt withdrawal from Afghanistan. The Marine of 17 years recorded his first viral complaint in August after 13 U.S. servicemen were killed in a suicide bombing attack in Kabul. In his videos, he called out high-ranking officials and demanded accountability for what he felt was a flawed departure from a country. Scheller was court-martialed for his controversial posts. He voluntarily resigned from the Marine Corps as the case worked its way through the military's justice system. In the meantime, several politicians testified in support of the disgraced ex-soldier, who had a remarkable record up until he started posting the videos. He also received support from fellow veterans in the U.S. and in Iraq and Afghanistan. Scheller pled guilty to 9 violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, including contempt toward officials, disrespect toward superior commissioned officers, willingly disobeying a superior commissioned officer, dereliction of duty, and failure to obey order or regulation, and unbecoming conduct. Colonel Glenn Hines, the judge who presided over the case, took Scheller's impeccable record into consideration when deciding his sentence. He reprimanded the former Marine and ordered him to forfeit $5,000 of his pay. Scheller's attorney told USA Today that he and his client were very satisfied with the outcome and that he thought the judge's decision was very fair. Although Scheller's conduct effectively ended his military career, it's true that things could have turned out much worse. At the outset of the trial, he was facing the possibility of having to forfeit 2/3 of his pay every month for a year. He also managed to avoid a dishonorable discharge. And number 1, controversial COVID video. A man claiming to be a German soldier was recently arrested after posting a video containing threats on social media. The off-putting footage showed the self-proclaimed staff sergeant ordering the military to lift COVID-19 restrictions and cancel a planned vaccine mandate for service people. He demanded an answer by the following day and firmly stated, "This is a warning." But the authorities weren't about to cave to the man's requirements. Instead, they arrested him in Munich amid a protest against coronavirus policies. In a tweet, the German Defense Ministry accused the suspect of making unacceptable threats against the state and said that they were in the process of examining the potential consequences. There's no room for someone like him in the country's military, according to Defense Minister Christine Lambrecht, who wrote that armed forces need people who stand firmly by Germany's constitution. She further stated that anyone who lacks these values has no place in the military. Germany isn't the only place where people are starkly divided when it comes to their opinions of how the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic should be handled. And while it's not as simple of labeling one school of thought as right and the other as wrong, there's certainly no need to act aggressive and threatening. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn more about shocking cases where soldiers went wrong, let me know in the comments and be sure to subscribe. See you next time.